You're looking at video showing the extensive damage left after U.S. strikes on Venezuela. Parts of a three-story building were destroyed. Its exterior wall was hit and steel fences outside were bent. Deformed shipping containers could be seen with their contents spilling onto docks, which really was a testimony to the force of these strikes. And on an airbase in the capital, trees were downed, cars were charred, and craters were left in the road. At least 40 people were reportedly killed in the large-scale assault early yesterday, and that includes civilians and soldiers. The U.S. military action has since drawn widespread international condemnation, with multiple countries urging a coordinated global response. Let's stay on this story, and we've reached this morning Jorge Heine. He is a former ambassador of Chile. He's also a non-resident fellow at Quincy Institute and author of The Non-Aligned World. Thank you so much for talking to us this morning.
Good morning. Delighted to be with you.
And I want to get a sense of the mood where you are in that region. How are the Latin American communities reacting one day after those attacks and also Maduro's capture?
Well, the reaction has been mixed. Presidents like President Lula of Brazil, President Sheinbaum of Mexico, President Boric of Chile, where I am right now, have condemned this U.S. attack on Venezuela, the bombing of the capital and the kidnapping of President Maduro and his wife. Other governments, the government of Argentina, the government of Ecuador, has come out supporting it. So the region is fragmented on this.
Let's talk more about that sense of things being a little bit fragmented, as you say. The fact that the reaction is so mixed, what does that tell you about the American operation?
Well, it tells you one thing. President Maduro was never very popular with many of his counterparts. So that accounts for part of the situation. But it is important to set this in the larger setting, and I think this is something that is now sinking in. This is the first U.S. military attack on the South American mainland ever in 200 years. We have had such attacks in the past on Mexico, on Central America, on the Caribbean, but never on the South American mainland. So a certain threshold has been crossed. We don't know what happens next. Mr. Trump has warned President Petro of Colombia to watch out. He has said Mexico might be next. Secretary of State Rubio has been talking about Cuba. So we are here in uncharted waters, in very dangerous territory. In the course of 2025, the Trump administration has undertaken military attacks on 7 countries. So we must really watch out for what happens next. And I think the reaction of the international community should be a bit stronger than it should have been. I'm struck by how bland, for example, the European reaction has been. Europe is supposed to stand for international law, and yet the reaction has been very muted.
I did want to go back a little bit more on what you're talking about. Trump's comments, specifically when it comes to the Colombian president and other countries, as you mentioned. Did you interpret what his comments were specifically to the Colombian president as a veiled threat?
I certainly do so. And so, again, once this happens in Venezuela, other countries in South America and elsewhere in the region might be on the line. So I think it is important there be some international reaction. There's supposed to be a meeting of the United Nations Security Council. I hope some measures are taken. Otherwise, the international system is moving into outright lawlessness.
The interim president of Venezuela, which is the vice president there, has said that its country is ready to defend itself. Donald Trump, on the other hand, says his intention is to run Venezuela in the interim. How do you see Venezuela defending itself, and what are you watching for in the coming days and weeks? Well,
I think there's a remarkable contrast between the military precision of the kidnapping of the Venezuelan president, which was undertaken very quickly in a couple of hours. He was already out of the country. And the many questions that are raised by what happens in Venezuela now. And I think President Trump's conference yesterday raised many more questions than answers. What does it mean that the U.S. will rule Venezuela? Will he appoint some sort of viceroy? Will Marco Rubio start running it, as he intimated yesterday, Mr. Trump did? So it's very unclear. And another thing that struck me is that many people thought that once Mr. Maduro was out of the country, the Venezuelan opposition, led by Ms. Maria Corina Machado, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, would sort of move smoothly in and start, running the country and being president. Well, that is not going to happen. Yesterday, Mr. Trump threw her under the bus and said she has no respect among Venezuelans. So there are many questions now about what will happen on the ground in Venezuela.
There's, on the one hand, what Trump said about the opposition. On the other hand, there are those who live within Venezuela who may be supporting her. How do you reconcile the differences there about how people feel they're in that country versus what President Trump is saying?
Well, the Venezuelan opposition has traditionally been extremely divided. They have never been able to get their act together and oust Mr. Maduro by themselves. They have therefore depended on U.S. intervention, and they thought they would be handed the government on a platter. Well, they haven't. And actually, the most realistic solution is, some sort of transitional government that goes on, led by Ms. Darcy Rodriguez, the former vice president, and take things from there. The opposition isn't going anywhere in Venezuela at this point.
There is so much uncertainty in that country, and we've been seeing the images earlier this morning of people lining up outside of grocery stores trying to stock up on supplies because they don't know what's coming next. Realistically, how long can Venezuela remain in this uncertainty and instability, given what Trump has expressed and given what local politicians within that country are expressing?
Well, I will say this. This has created a lot of uncertainty. The notion that you undertake regime change simply by getting rid of the leader, or in this case, extricating the leader and his wife in this case, and then somehow things will, look after themselves. It doesn't work that way. There is a regime beyond the leader, and there are many people that have worked with Mr. Maduro, and they will hold on to power. So the question now is, how will Mr. Trump and his government try to deal with them? What seems to be the plan is some sort of working arrangement between Washington and the government now led by Ms. Darcy Rodriguez. We'll see how that works out. The outlook, I would say, is not very bright.
I want to ask you finally about the oil industry there, because it's not just the change in regime, it's also the oil. And there's a lot of it there in Venezuela. Trump has mentioned he plans to control the industry, though how he plans to execute that, still not clear. How much of a role is the oil here versus these other allegations about Maduro and these charges of narco-terrorism?
Well, look, the charges of narco-terrorism are really quite bogus. Latin America is perhaps the region in the world with the lowest amount of terrorism anywhere. And also the charges on drug trafficking are also quite bogus. There's never been a boat with fentanyl detained on the Caribbean Sea. That tells you everything you need to know about that. So my sense is that you're quite right. The oil issue is central, and it also has to do with the petrodollar. There was an agreement between Henry Kissinger and Saudi Arabia in 1974 that all oil transactions, international oil transactions, should be paid for in dollars. Now that has come under fire. A number of countries are not doing that. Venezuela was not doing that. And that, of course, is very important for the US economy. So I think an important part of what is happening in Venezuela has to do that, to save that petrodollar arrangement.
Jorge Heine, thank you so much for your time and for your insight this morning and for talking to us today.
Thank you.